Patch party time. You know what to do because it is block number 2. Let's get started. Yes, welcome back to Patch Party. I am Rob Appell, your host here at Making It Fun by Michael Miller Fabrics. But I cannot take credit for this awesome quilt you are seeing right here behind me, right? This is the Patch Party block of the month, and it was designed and created by Leila Gardunia. She's a wonderful pattern partner. I almost said patchwork pattern partner because I got patches on the brains. And today in block number 2, we are doing a bunch of little patches. I mean, look at this thing, right? It is a super cool snowflake looking block. We've got a lot of little units. You're gonna learn a bunch of things. I even learned something new, a technique I had never seen, the way that she designed the snowball corners and the flying geese, and everything worked out so nicely. Let me walk you through the pattern today. Stick this back on the design wall, of course. Now, if you are new to block 2, you maybe missed block number 1. I just want to remind you that this is a project that is to support our local quilt shops, our online retailers, and of course our pattern partner, Leila. So you need to purchase the pattern to get the specific information, such as the sizes necessary, that kind of thing. I'm going to be the instructor, assuming you are the class that already has the materials necessary. So this is a really cool video. If you do not want to purchase the pattern, you'll learn technique here that's really, really cool, and you can apply it in a lot of your quilting projects in the future. But really what we're doing here is supporting this wonderful block of the month program, and you can get the patterns, like I said before, in your shops, your local shops, some of the online retailers, and different stores are presenting it different ways. Some of them even have kits. So this is going to be super fun. We at Making It Fun are always using Michael Miller Fabrics. It's on the shirt, it's in the brain, it's what I do because I love it, and I love working with Michael Miller Fabrics. Especially this cotton couture. The cotton couture is our high density solid, comes in 200 plus colors and is gorgeous. Now each of the blocks, the block of the month that we're doing here, is going to be matched with one cotton couture. Islay color, whatever, short for island, and then the aqua fairy frost. And if you look really close on this aqua fairy frost, I don't know if you can see the shimmer, but it not only has its original fairy frost, but it has a little extra glitter, a little extra texture, and oh boy do I love it. And the way that the contrast works on the quilt, on the blocks, is fantastic. So you're going to have a bunch, and I mean a bunch of different size squares, so do pay attention. All of the cutting instructions that you have in your pattern, I will point out you're making 2 blocks of this particular block number 2 like you did from block number 1. So all of these cutting instructions here are for all of the pieces you need for 2 blocks. I just want to point that out so you don't feel like you have to double this cookie recipe or you'll be covered in chocolate chips for days to come. So at any rate, we're going to dive right in. I'm going to follow the steps on the instructions, and we're going to start by making what become the flying geese unit. So we're going to have 2 different color squares here. We're going to do the same process to both of these. These are our background squares right now. What I'm going to do, let's just start with our awesome aqua color here. Islay color, excuse me. Now, you also have 2 more smaller squares, and you've drawn a line diagonally using like a fine tip Sharpie marker, something like this, and a ruler, of course. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to lay one of these on this corner. Maybe you've seen this. I hadn't. This is really, really cool. We're going to lay one of those on that corner, and then I'm going to lay this other one on its opposite corner, and I'm really double checking to make sure that that line runs all the way through, because that is going to be a guideline for stitching. Now the instructions do require a couple of pins, and mine are hidden down here. Let me grab them for us. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and throw a pin through the middle here to hold this. As you get more proficient with this technique, you can probably pinch them and go right to the machine. But while I'm practicing being a good teacher here, let me teach you as our instructor, Leila, has requested. Okay, now, as we get into here, like I said, we're going to use this drawn line as our guideline. So we're not putting the thread on this line, we're putting the edge of that 1/4 inch foot with the edge guide, which I also love. It's a fantastic tool to be using on all of our patchwork. So just starting up at the top, and I actually put the edge on the other side of the line, so I'm making just a little narrower seam allowance, and that will help in the long run. Whatever we're doing, we just want to be consistent. We are making a quilt, and I am not interested in fixing the sewing machine this afternoon, so I'm not going to sew over that pin. I'm going to come right here, and I'm now watching this corner. I'm just going to kind of lift this up, make sure everything's running nice and straight through here. There we go, have it just as I want it as my guideline, and I'm going to continue on stitching through. Using that edge guide as my guideline, removing the pin before I stitch into it, and sewing right off the edge. Now, once you've done one layer of sewing, we do not need to repin for the other side. Everything is secure. So I'm just going to rotate this. I like to put my foot all the way up for this so that there's no tension on the thread. I'm just going to bring this all the way around, drop that foot again, and away we go, using that drawn line as a guideline on the inside edge of my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just coming through here ever so nicely. Now, before we go to the iron, we're actually going to cut. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and lay that ruler right on those guidelines. It was kind of my safety there. And I'm going to cut corner to corner right through like yay. And then we're going to come to the iron and we're going to press these new little white triangles up. I know this might not make any sense. Like, I really had to follow the instructions the first time I did it, but it worked terrific. It's awesome. Okay. So as I come over here, I'm going to press uphill away from the big square into the two smaller squares. And we're going to do that on both pieces. Now what we're going to do is, now we have this kind of like a heart little shape, right? We're going to take the other two. So we had 4 of these size triangles. And now I'm going to lay this right in here. Kind of looks like a bandit mask or something. I just think it's super cool. Grab another pin and go ahead and pin that through to hold it and secure it. And we'll do the same to the other side. Now, once again, this drawn line is going to be a edge guide, not a stitch guide. So we're going to go ahead and lower that presser foot one more time. Oh, I want to go a little further back. There we go. I want to lower it on the outside and begin my stitching as I come through, removing that pin again. And again, rotating because we're making 2 seams. Now it's probably starting to make sense. You're probably starting to see how this is going to cut open and work. I'm always impressed when I meet somebody that's invented or come up with a new method for doing something that we've all been doing the other way for so long. Now, I don't know if she really invented this. I guess I could ask her. But I just thought it was a terrific technique when I was prepping for today's video. Sorry, I should tell you what I'm doing. I just cut that last drawn line, and you know what I'm going to do now, right? I'm going to come right over to the iron. I'm going to press it open, or press it over. I always say open, but I'm really pressing it over. I don't think I've ever split a seam and pressed it open, even in curves. And look at this. Look at these wonderful little flying geese units, right? Perfect. I'm going to take a moment, and you probably should use your ruler to keep your hand safe, but I just want to take and what we call dog ear or remove those little corners so I have a perfect little flying goose unit. And now I'm going to go ahead and finish this one, and then I will also take this large white square and my other solids, right? So if you're following the instructions, we have solids and prints and background. Lay that out the same way and construct these to end up with a total of 4 of our flying geese units like this from each of our colors. So I'm going to get cracking on these. I'll be right back with these geese units all wrapped up in a flock so I can show you the rest of the steps for block number 2 today.
Hey there. I'm getting ready to sew together my flying geese right now, and I want to show you a trick that will help keep these points from getting cut off. And you can use this on any sort of flying geese block. So I'm putting them right sides together, and I'm going to be sewing across this top edge with a 1/4 inch seam. But the trick is to pay attention to this seam line and this seam line. They make a cross right here, and that cross is what you want to pay attention to, that X. So as you sew across here with your 1/4 inch seam, you should sew across that X. And if you sew across that X, your points are going to be perfect. If you go on this side of the X, the tip of that flying geese will be cut off. And if you get too far on that side, then it'll get cut off too. So right there is right where you want to be. So give that a try when you're sewing your flying geese together.
Awesome. Now you can see I actually have 4 of the flying geese units of each of the 2 different color patterns or opposites. And as I get ready to stack these up and set them aside for later, it's kind of cool because watch what happens. You're actually going to see that unit start to form just like that. And that's what they're going to look like when they're all done. So just another really cool way of building a neat unit for our quilts using units we already know and understand. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the center of the block, right? We're going to do this part right here, which is what's considered a snowball block. So I'm going to have another one of my squares. This one wasn't the largest, but it was almost as big. And then I'm going to have 4 more of my cotton couture, my solid squares. Again, I've drawn a diagonal line on all 4 of these, and it's going to be real simple. We're just going to set 1 each on a corner. Now they won't stay there as I head over to the sewing machine, so I'm just going to sew 1 at a time, but I just want to point out they are not going to touch. A lot of times we have one overlap the other. You're not doing anything incorrectly by not having these touch. I want you to see about 1/2 inch in there or so. So anyways, let's go ahead and put 1 of these on together so you can see, and then I'll blast through the rest and you'll see how that looks. But we'll just keep the cameras rolling today. We're not in any kind of hurry. Oh, and by the way, let me point out, we are now sewing right along that drawn line. So earlier that was a guide line. Now it's actually our stitch line. And with these snowballs, I just come down, I lift my presser foot so that when your foot is up, there's no tension on your upper thread. So it's easier to move the product or the piece or the patchwork around. Now while it's all over on my machine, it's so easy just to go ahead and lay this down. And again, that drawn line is for sewing on. So I'm just looking through the foot at that ink line, and I'm just going to sew right on top of it there. Again, come to the edge, just give myself a little bit of room to move, drop this on. So even when you have some of these blocks that have a lot of parts and pieces, the construction is very similar, very simple, and very efficient. If you weren't waiting for me to explain it, you probably would have been done already. And here's our last piece going in. And now as it comes out of the machine, we're basically just going to go ahead and trim off the excess. So I'm going to use basically a 1/4 inch seam allowance, trimming off the corners of the big square and the add-on little squares. We're doing that to all 4 sides. And I'm really just using the ruler to keep my hand safe. You could do this freestyle if you wanted. You can set those on the floor for later. Shop vacuum. And now come on in here with your iron and just press out each corner. You see how I'm doing that? Just kind of running the iron over the top of each corner. So what that really does is it brings all those units back together to form the same square we had originally started with, but now we've got these awesome other colors on for the snowball is what that block unit is called. We're going to do something very similar here. These are diagonal units. You're going to need 4 of these for the project as well. They start with the base of the fairy frost and then they bring in the background color. And that was done super simply as well. I just had another small square, had some really itsy bitsy tiny whiny little, tiny whiny? These aren't whining, they're just sitting there. I shouldn't insult them that way. So anyways, small little background squares, already drawn that line across there. We're going to do the same thing, but we're just putting them on 2 edges. So this is real easy. I'm just going to lay that one on there, but they're getting a little small. Sometimes I find the smaller the pieces, the slower I go. Helps a little. Again, using the drawn line as the sewing line, we're putting the needle and thread right on top of that line. And on this one, I'm going to actually cut the thread and move because I'm on the opposite side of the block. I can't just do the little trick I just showed you about snowballing on those corners there. This one goes on the opposite side. And we'll do the same thing to these as well. We're just going to trim off these edges. So if you don't want to use your ruler, just real carefully, real gently, leave yourself roughly a 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit less seam allowance in there. Okay, just like that. And then the same thing. You'll come over to the iron, fold over one side first, press it out, fold over the other side, press it out. And yeah, technically you're not pressing to the dark side this way because of our color combination choices, but you are making yourself a nice little diagonal block nonetheless. You need 4 of those. I think I just told you that a moment ago. What I didn't tell you, but it's really good news. You ready for it? All the pieces are done. It's easy. We're just going to build it all out now. It's super, super cool. So you have a layout diagram here on the second page. This is one of the only blocks that has 2 pages of info for it. So here's the layout diagram right here on the second page, but I'll build it out for you as we go. Okay, so what I like to do whenever I'm doing that is I get all of my parts and pieces organized here. We'll start right here with the center of the block. It makes sense to me, right? And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab the flying geese units that actually have the solid color there in the center. Now start with these by putting the solid color tip pointing right into the snowball center we just made. See how that kind of carries the colors along this way? So we're going to put these units in first, just like this. Okay, super simple. Now, while we're still on those flying geese units, let's just take the other ones and we're going to lay them in kind of like forming an arrow. So now basically, and if you really look at it, it's the blue tip, then the white tip or triangle pointing up, but you can follow the colors through there. So those are going to go like this, very simply. Okay, now the next part, and this is an orientation thing, so I want to make sure that you're really paying attention and you get this right. The diagonals come in, and the easiest way to say it is the diagonal touches the color on the snowball block again. Okay, so pulling everything color-wise out of the center of our block unit today. So those go there very simply. Now earlier, and I didn't mention, I did say you had a lot of squares. These are other size squares. These are the same size squares as these ones as they're made down. And now I have basically my background color. So I'm going to lay one on each of these edge pieces, but not filling in the corner yet because you know what's going to go in the corner. Oop, that one stuck to that there. Happens all the time. Okay, and now we're going to take the leftovers or the last squares from our cotton couture, and those form in those beautiful blue corner blocks like you can see right out here all coming together. So this is going to be perfect. Now these are all the pieces in the orientation. The easiest way to do this is to separate each row at a time. And I'm just going to go across here and make a seam, a seam, a seam, a seam. And then I'm going to press each one in opposite directions so it goes back together pretty quickly. So I'm going to jump into hyperspace mode here for all of you so you can be with me and come back to see this all coming back together. But we're going to sew all of these parts and pieces together pretty dang fast. So buckle your seatbelts, have another cup of coffee so you can keep up. And like I said before, let's get started. Excellent. So as I was saying before we went into hyperspace mode, I want all of the individual rows sewn together so that now I can iron efficiently to help me get my patchwork back together with some precision. Like it's not all that important. Like these all look fantastic, right? But some of you have made quilts before, and the more little pieces you use, the more wonky, and that's a quilting term, the block can get. So one of the things that really helps is obviously cutting and sewing slower. But as I iron, I'm going to iron now from one side. So I started on my right hand side of my body, and I'm pressing each of these seams now towards me as I come across here with my nice hot iron. So that now gives me a nice crisp row with all of my seams technically now on this side of the sew-in line. So on the next unit, I want the seams on the other side of the sew-in line so I can do what's called nesting. And that's where our seams will start to sit like this so they lock together, and it makes the sewing so much easier. And that gives you these really nice crisp stitch points, even if you're a bit sloppy like me. So, okay, so we sewed this one, we ironed this one from this side. So now the trick is I grab from the side I ironed, I rotate it in the air so that I'm always kind of ironing over here from this right side of my body. It's just what works. But now I'm technically pressing the seams the other direction than the way I did before. Real easy. And then you just have to make sure you rotate it back into place, and it's real easy to double check that orientation because you're looking for those arrows now, okay? So again, this one I want to iron starting on this side. Sometimes that patchwork in the corners needs a little bit of encouragement to go the way we need it to go versus the way it wants to go. If you've ever sewn with a lot of batik against solid fabrics too, sometimes that happens. The batik being even more dense will sometimes do that for you. Just a little bonus learning tip here today from all of us at Making It Fun. Okay, remember, I want to rotate. And the final block will be in the same orientation as the first because we have odd numbers. So just like that, 1, 3, and 5, one direction, 2 and 4, the opposite. And now as those go together like that, let me go ahead and show you, might be easiest on the big block. So as I flip this over, and this one is the one that's going to sew into there, you can now see the seams are on opposite directions. So I'm going to go ahead and match those up. Head into the sewing machine, and I kind of do this like this massage, this little, and you can feel it like, lock in, just lock in. I love that. Okay, and now it's there, and 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're just going to take our time. And as I go though, I'm holding that union together, and the minute I secure it with the needle, I move down to the next one. I find that next one here, I lock it in, like I said, lock it in, right? And then we're ready to rock and roll. And in this phase of the block, I actually go back to ironing after every set of construction. So pressing, and now I'm just going to press them all moving in one direction. So we're down here. I'm going to flop that over and just continue matching up those notches, locking them in, and sew on these last few rows for all of us so we can wrap up this awesome part of block number 2. That's right. Let me press this out so you can see how awesome it has turned out for us all. And I just want to take a moment and thank my partner, Leila. This has been another fantastic block. This project is incredible. I'm super blessed to get to work with it. All of you can join me the first Wednesday of each month. We're going to do each block one a month as we go along. This was block 2. We have 10 more months together. This is going to be fantastic, as well as I'm always putting out other new fun videos on quilting and other sewing at Making It Fun. But I'm really, really excited about this new patch party block of the month. I'm glad you are here. The patch party continues a Wednesday very, very soon. We'll see you all then, folks. Thanks again for being here. Wow, you are still there. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of the video. I know, I get a little long-winded sometimes. But if you did enjoy today's video, make sure you check out a few of the other ones we've created. I think they're terrific. And of course, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the little bell to be notified. I don't want you to miss a moment of the fun. Stay safe and happy sewing.